Hi everyone, today we'll be learning how to make tic-tac-toe using React. So when you play the game, you can see on top that it updates who the current player is, and then once one person wins, it updates the score on top as well. And then once you're done playing, you can click on reset and it resets the board and you can start playing all over again. So this is a great beginner's project for any React developers, and we'll be going over the HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So without any further ado, let's get started with the code. So to get started, we have an empty VS Code project over here. And to create a boilerplate React project, all we need to do is use the create React app utility. So we can just write down npx create React app and name it any project name we want. So we can name it tic-tac-toe. And we can run this command, and then once it's done running, we'll be back. Okay, so our project is done being created, and all we have to do is cd into the directory and we can get started. So we do cd tic-tac-toe and we're in the current projects directory. Now create React app creates a lot of boilerplate and we don't need a lot of it. So I'll just go ahead and delete some files. So we don't need setup tests.js right now, so we'll delete that. And we'll also delete report web vitals.js. We will also delete logo.svg since we won't be using that. And also app.test.js. Then we can go inside app.js and remove the import of the logo on top over here. And inside the div, remove everything and just write hello world and save that. Also, we also want to go inside app.css and delete basically everything. And then we want to add a few styles over here. So first we'll add box sizing and we'll set it to border box, which just makes it easier to size different elements in our HTML. And we'll also apply a style to the body, and we'll set a margin of 0 to the body, and we'll add a background color of slightly light gray, and we'll save that. And one more thing I want to do is I want to go to Google Fonts over here and I want to import this certain font. So what we'll do for that is we'll copy the link tags over here. We'll go into index.html and then put them below this link tag in line 12. So this imports our font into our project, and all we need to do is go into app.css and add the font family as the one that we imported. And then as a fallback, we can use sans serif. And then we can save that, and we can go in the command line and write npm start to start our project. And we have an error because we had deleted report web vitals, but we were still importing it. So we'll go inside index.js and just delete those lines. And if we save that and go back, yep, we have hello world written over here in our custom font. Okay, so now that the setup is done, we have to think about the different components our project will have. So when we're breaking down our project into components, we can see that there are three main components in our page over here. Firstly, there's the scoreboard on the top, then there's the reset button down here, and then there's the 9x9 grid over here. So those are the three main components, and then the grid also contains another component, which is the boxes. So there are 9 of these boxes laid out inside here. So these are the components we'll be working on. So let's get started with the box first. So to get started, we will create a folder inside our src folder, which will contain all the components. So we say new folder and name it components. And inside that, we'll make a JavaScript file for the box. We'll say name it box.js, and we'll make a corresponding CSS file. So box.css. Inside box.js, we can click RAFC, and that will create a functional component for us, an arrow functional component. And we can also import the CSS by saying import./box.css. And to see this, we will need to import it inside our app.js. So we will say import box from ./components/box.js. Actually, we don't need to write the JS part over there. And we can just add the box component over here. So if we save that and we go to our project over here, it should update. Yep, there we have the box over there. So now to make some changes to our component, first of all, it will be a button. So we change this div to a button type, and the value inside will be X, for example. So if we save that and go back, instead of the box, we see that it's actually a button with X inside. Now we can see that this button doesn't exactly look like how we want it to in the final project. So we will have to change the CSS for this. So firstly, we need to assign it a class name. So we'll give it a class name of box. And then inside box.css, we will add the styles for this component. So firstly, we want to remove the background color and make it white. So we can say background color and just keep it as white. Then we also want to remove any existing border it has. And we want the border radius to be slightly rounded. So we can keep it as 10%. Now if we save this and go back, we can see that it looks slightly better, but then it's too small. So we need to make some more changes. Firstly, we need to add a shadow to our button. So we will say box shadow. We will give it an offset of 0 pixels on both the horizontal and vertical axis, and give it an 8 pixels of blur, and put the color as 888. We also want the width to be 5 rem, as well as the height, since it's a square. And we also want to align the text to the center of the button. And if we save that and go back, it looks a lot better already. Now the X is still too small, so we need to change that. So we'll make the font size as 5 EM and keep the font family as the one that we had imported, because when you put the body's font family as a certain type, it does not get applied to the buttons automatically. So we put it as Fredoka and say sans serif as a default. And we will also want to make it as bold, and we want to center it vertically as well. And to ensure that, we can just say line height of 5 rem, and we can keep the margin as 0.5 rem when it's laid out in a grid. This will help space them apart. So now we can see that it looks a lot more like how we want it to when we are playing the game. So now that we have created the component, we need to add some more styling to it. Like for example, if we put an X and an O, they have different colors. So based on the value, we want to assign the color. So we will go back, and instead of putting the class name as box, we will assign it to a variable instead. So what we will do is say const style is equal to value. If it's equal to X, then we will set the class name as box and another class name as X, or we will set it to box and O. And this value we will be taking in as a prop. So we will say value and on click, which will be passed in as props to this component. So basically what this is doing is taking the value of this box and checking if it's equal to X, then assign the class names box and X, otherwise assign the class names box and O. Then we go down here, instead of assigning just box, we can say style. And if we apply that and go back, we can see that it still looks like this. And that's because we aren't importing any values from our app.js. So let's just pass in these props. So let's just say value is equal to X and on click equal to null. And we can just close this index.js and go back into our box.js. So now we are passing in a value and an on click. So we can assign the on click of this button to the on click function. And instead of just showing the X over here, we can show the value. Now we've done that, we also want to add some details of these styles of X and O, which will basically be the colors of the font. So we can say dot X, and we need to assign the color of the font over here. So we will basically say color and put it as RGB 255, 70 and 37 for X. And for O, we'll do something similar, but we want it to be blue. So we'll say 44, 135 and 255 and put it as O and save that. And if we go back, hopefully it should show a red X. And if we and we also want to change how the card appears when we hover on top of it. So we can just say dot box on hover, and we want to change the box shadow. So we say box shadow. It'll still be 0 pixels and 0 pixels offset on the axes, but it'll be more blurred and it'll be the same color. So now if we go back and we hover over the card, it seems to be coming closer to the user. So that's the styles for our button done here. So now that we have a single box rendering, we need to do it for 9 of them. So to get started with that, we'll just create a list of X's, 9 of them, and we'll just name it board, and we will just put X's there and repeat that 9 times. And what we want to do is we want to iterate through this list and render each of these values. So to do that, we will create another component named board.js. So we'll go into the components folder and create a board.js file and another board.css file. We go into board.js and just write down RAFC, create the functional component, and we will import it into our app.js. So we just say import board from /components/board, and we will render the board over here and pass in our board list as a prop. And then we will remove this box component from here and render it inside our board. So go inside board.js, render the box component, and just import the box component over here. So we just remove this from here and import it over here. So we import ./box and we save this. Now we want to iterate through that list that we got from our props. So we will accept that from our props. So we go here and write down board, and we will basically go inside this div and iterate through that list and map it to a box component. So we say board.map, and for each of these elements we take the value at the present index, and we also take the index that we are at, and we say okay, take this value and return a new box component. Paste that here. The value will be the value that we get from our list. So we type value, and the onClick function, which we do not have till now, will also be received from app.js. So we receive it from app.js and we say run the onClick function and pass the index on which it is being run. So if we save that after removing this bracket over here and go back into app.js and just pass in onClick as null for right now and save that, we can go back and see there are 9 X's rendered over here. Okay, so now we have to worry about how to style these so that it's a 3x3 grid. So we'll go back over here and go into board.js and give this div a class name of board. Name it board, and we will also import the style sheet for this component. So import ./board.css. We will go inside board.css and add the styles for the board component. So we will say .board, and we will be using CSS grids for this, which is great if you want to arrange something in a 3x3 grid. So we will display it as a grid, and we will say for the columns it will repeat a column 3 times, and each column will be 6 rems apart. We want to place the items in the center of the columns, and we want to justify content as center so that the grid is at the center of the page. So if we save that, it should render everything in a 3x3 grid in the center of the page. Great. So that's how we have created our board, and we have rendered an 3x3 grid. Now what we need to do is add some functionality to our game, because if we click on the box, nothing happens. So what we need to do is go back into app.js, and instead of having the board as a static list, we'll first need to import React and use state from the React library. So we'll say import React and use state from React. And instead of having this as a constant list, we will have it as a state. So const board set board is equal to use state. And the default value of this will be an array with 9 elements, and it will be null for each value in the beginning. So we can delete this line over here and pass in the board there. And if we save, it should not show anything for each of these 9 boxes. Yep. So now that that's done, we need to have a function which does something when each of the buttons is clicked. So we will name it const handle box click, and it will take the index of which box has been clicked. So say for example, this box, it will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if we go into board.js, we know which box is being clicked by the index over here. So we will take in the box index, and we will create an updated version of the board. So we will say take the current board, map it to a new version. For each of the elements, we take in the value and the current index, and we basically say if the current index is equal to the index which has been clicked, then we need to return x. Otherwise, we need to return the value which was already present over there. And then once we have the updated version of the board, we need to update this board variable. So we will say set board and pass in the updated board. And then what we need to do is we need to take this function and pass it down into the handle box click method over here as a prop. So we will say pass it down over here, save that, and then once we go back and we click on any of these, it updates the value. Now it's only updating it as x because we don't know who the current player is. So for that, we'll add another state which will say const x playing and set x playing, which will keep track of whether the current player is x or not. So we'll say use state, and we will set it to true, so x will always start the game. And then over here, instead of just setting it as x, we can set it as x playing equal to true. If it is true, then we set it as x. Otherwise, x is not playing, O is playing, so we set it as O. And what we need to do is, whenever this function is called, we know that the current player is done playing, and we can switch to the next player. So we can go down here and say set x playing is the opposite of the current value of x playing, so that if x was playing, it will be set to O, and if it was O, it will be set to x. So if we save this and go back here and hit refresh and play, we will see that the player keeps changing each time. So that's how we have added some functionality to our game. So now that we are able to click on the boxes, we need to see if a player has won the game or not. So there are about 8 win conditions for a certain player. They can win if their values are present in the indexes 0, 1, 2, or 3, 4, 5, or 6, 7, 8, or on the vertical columns over here, or these 2 diagonals. So we know the 8 possible indices that the values will need to be present in for a player to win. So what we can do is we can go to the top over here and we can define the win conditions for a particular player. Okay, so these are the possible indices in which the value will need to be present for the player to win. So we can save that. And then we need a function which will check the board and see every time when a player plays if the player has won or not. So we can name a function called checkWinner, which will take in the board, the current state of the board, and it will return if the player has won or not. So we will iterate through each of the conditions. So we will say for let I equal to 0, I less than win conditions dot length I plus plus, and we will find out the first, second and third index at which the value will need to be present for the player to win, and we will say win conditions I, and we will basically go through these three indices and check if the value present at all three of them is the same. So we will first check if the value is present at all at the first one. Then we will check if board X equal to board Y and board Y equal to board Z. If it is, we know that a player has met one of the win conditions. So we can return board X. Otherwise, we don't return anything. Now to see this in action, we will just console.log board X, and then we will call this check winner function on top over here after the updated board. So we will say check winner in the updated board. So if we go back here, open the inspector tools, click refresh and get started. We put X there, O there, X, O and X, and we can see that X has won over here. So now we know how to find out who the winner is. So now that we have a way of finding out who has won the current game, we also need a way to keep track of the scores of both of the players. Now before we get started on that, we have an issue in our current code where if you put values in the boxes and you click on them again, you are able to update the values, and we don't want that. So the fix for this is simple. All you need to go into board.js, and when you're passing this onClick function, you have to check if the value you're passing in is equal to null, then only you pass in the onClick function. So you say value equal to null, then only you pass in the onClick function, because if it's null, that means X or O is in there and you want to be able to update these values. Otherwise you don't. So if we go back and click on these values again, nothing happens. So that's that issue fixed. Now going on to keeping track of the score, we will make that another state and we will name it scores and set scores, and the initial value will be a dictionary with the values of X score being 0 and O score also being 0. Now what we'll want to do is we will get the winner from this check winner function. So const winner is equal to check winner, and we'll say if a winner does exist after playing this move, check who the winner is. So if it's O, then we will do something, otherwise it's X and we will do something else. So what we will say is let O score and extract that from the scores state, increment O score by 1 and say update this set scores. So you'll say set scores dot scores. So keep all the other values except for the new value of O score, which we'll get from this variable. And we can do the same thing with X score over here. So you will say X score, X and X. And since we have no way of seeing this right now, let's just log it onto the console. Scores. Now if we go back and play the game now, we will make X win over here, and we'll see that it's 1, but the value hasn't updated, but it will update on the next iteration, and we can see that X score is 1 over here. So now that we can see it in the console, we need a way to see it in our UI. For that, we will create the scoreboard component. So we will go inside the components folder and create a scoreboard.js and under the scoreboard.css. And we will go inside scoreboard.js and import the React functional component. So we will say RAFC, and we will also import the CSS. And once we have made that, we can go into our app.js remove this console.log over here and show the score board on top. And we will be passing in our scores as a props to this. So let's just do that right now. And let's import the component on top over here. And we can save that. And once we go back, we should be able to see a scoreboard over there. Okay, so now let's get started with the component. So we will go into scoreboard.js and we will take in two props actually. We will take in the scores and we will also take in X playing. Because if you remember, in our app, we can keep track of who's playing with this underline over here. And for that, we need a variable which keeps track of who's playing right now. So over here, we're taking in these two props, and we will also extract the X score and O score from the scores variable. We will assign a class name of scoreboard to this div. And for each of the scores inside, we will create a span. So we will say span. And for inside this, we will keep the value of X dash. And this will show the X score variable. And it's the same, but here it will show the O score variable. And over here, let's just pass in the X playing variable as a prop. So we can say X playing equal to X playing. Let's save that, and if we go back, it shows that X has won twice and O has won 0 times. So we can see another issue over here is that once the game is done, it keeps updating the values, but we'll get to that later. So if we refresh that, we need to add some styling to our scoreboard.js so it looks a bit better. So first of all, to the span over here, we'll add a class name. And this class name is going to be conditional based on a few things. So one thing for sure we know, we need to add a class name of score because both of the scores will have shared values. And we'll also need to name it X score so that the color can be changed. And then based on whether the player is active or not, we need to also show the underline. So for that, we'll say if player is not X playing, then we need to also mark it as inactive. And we'll see how this plays in later on. And we need to put the opposite of this into O score. So we'll say if X is playing, then this is inactive. So if X is playing, obviously O will be inactive. Then we go into scoreboard.css and we have to add the styles for these. So firstly, we'll add the styles for the scoreboard component. Firstly, we want to display it as a flexbox. So we'll say display flex. You want the flex direction to be in a row. You want to align the items to the center. And we want to justify the content evenly across the row. Justify content, space evenly. And if we save that, we should see these updates. So we need to set a constant width for our component. So we'll put it as 20 rems. We will also increase the font size to 1.5 rems, 1.5 em, sorry. We'll also keep the background color as white so it's easier to see. We'll put a margin of 3 rem vertically and an auto horizontally so it's centered on the page. And we'll also add a box shadow of 0 pixels of offset and an 8 pixel blur and a color of 888. And if we go back, it should look a bit better. Yep. Now what we need to do is also add a border radius of 0.5 rem and a font weight of bold. And if we go back, it looks a bit better. So now what we need to do is we need to add a definition of the score class names, which we had applied to the spans inside. So we'll put the width as 100% of the container it has. We will align the text to the center. So text align center. And also we'll add a vertical padding of 1 rem. So if we save that, it looks a lot better already. And now we need to add some styles for the color. So we'll say X score. The color will be an RGB value which we had used before. It'll be 255, 70, 37. We also want to add a border to the bottom. So we'll say border bottom. 5 pixels, it'll be solid. And we will just copy the RGB value from here. And we also want to add a border radius. So it'll be 0.5 rem, 0, 0, 0.5 rem. What this does is that it applies a 0.5 rem to the top left, 0 here, and 0.5 rem again in the bottom left. And we can do a similar thing for O score. So we'll put it as O score over here, change the RGB value to 44, 135 and 255 and put it over here as well. Instead of having the 0.5 on the left corner, we will have it on the right corners. So for that we need to put it in the middle. And we can just put this as 0. And of course, over here, we need to set this as O score. If we save this, it looks a lot better. But now you see that the underline is on both of them, and we only want it to be on the one that is not inactive. So we can also add a dot inactive style, and we can say if you are inactive, just remove the border bottom. So we'll say 5 pixels, solid and transparent. And if we refresh, we see that the X is currently playing, X has played, and now O is playing. X has won, and then the score has been updated. Now, as we mentioned, even though somebody has won the game, you can keep on playing and keep on updating the score. So to fix that, we need to have a game over state, after which the game will reset. So we will go back into app.js and add another state for game over. We will say const game over and set game over, and we will put the initial value as false. Now what we need to do is go at the bottom over here and define another function called reset board. Const reset board. This will reset the values inside our list once somebody has won the game and the game has been over. So set game over equal to false, since we will be setting it to true once the game is over. And we will set the board as an array of length 9 and fill it with null values. Now whenever somebody wins, we want to go over here, and if the win condition is true, we want to set the game over as true. So what will happen is somebody will win the game over will be set as true, and then only once we call the reset board function, the game over will be set to false and they'll be able to play the game. Now to stop them from being able to play the game, we will come over here inside the board component and say if the game is over and somebody clicks on a box, what we want them to do is call the reset board function. Otherwise the game is not over yet, and they can just call the handle box click function as per normal. So if we save this and go back and refresh, we can make X win the game, and then once you click on something else, it resets the board and you can start playing again. So we have the reset board functionality, and it would be nice to have a button down here which can reset the board whenever we want. So for that, what we'll do is we'll go into the components folder again and we'll create a reset button function or component. So we'll say reset button.js and reset button.css. We'll go inside reset button.js and create the functional component, and we'll also import the style sheet, import./reset button.css. and we will import it inside app.js as well. And put it below the board. We also want to pass in the function reset board, so we can reset the board whenever it's clicked on. So we can say reset board is equal to reset board. Now we will go inside reset button, and we will pass in the props over here. So reset board, and instead of having it as a div, we will put it as a button, and we will give it a class name of reset button, and on click we want to call the reset board function, and inside we can just say reset. So if we go back here, we have a reset button. So if we put in some values and we click on the reset button, it resets everything and we can start playing again. Now let's add some styles to our button. So we will go back here and go to resetButton.css and add some styles. So we will say .reset-btn. We will remove the border, put the border radius as 0.5 rem, and give it a background color of slightly blue. So RGB 0, 110, 255. And if we just save this, we should have a better looking button. Yep, so now we need to make it a bit larger. So firstly, we'll put the font as white, so it's a bit easier to see. We'll increase the font size to 2 rem. We will add some padding between the font and the button's outer edges, 0.5 rem and 1 rem. We will add some margin of 2 rem and auto horizontally, and we will display it as block. Now it's centered on the middle of the page, and now whenever you play a game and you click on the reset button, it resets the game. So let's just go over the entire project one more time. You are able to play the game, and as you play, it updates the score on top as well as the current player. And then once you're done, you can click on the reset button to reset the entire scoreboard. So that's about it for our tutorial today. I hope you liked it and I hope you learned something new. If you did like it, please do leave a comment, subscribe, and do like the video. And if you want the code for this project, I've left the link for the GitHub repo in the description, so do check that out. Thanks for watching.